Lake Tahoe is around the lake and just a little bit off. And once you get away from that, it's quite forested and sparse.
And she said, well, be aware that you'll probably get a response, and probably pretty immediate.
And it was instantaneous. And they all hit the ground because they're scared to death.
Didn't know what was going on, and I heard that, and I was alone with one other guy camping in the woods in the wilderness area. It freaked me out too.
The state of California is home to many things: palm tree-studded beaches, gigantic metropolises, and even far-reaching deserts. But it is also home to some of the most rugged mountains in North America, the Sierra Nevadas. Stretching 400 miles from north to south and 60 miles east to west, the Sierras are known for their jagged granite peaks, making the name an apt one. When the Spanish explorers made their way into the interior of California, they named this vast range the Sierra Nevadas, meaning snowy, jagged mountain range. The range stretches through 18 counties in California and 3 in Nevada. It hosts 5 national parks, 9 national forests, 13 principal rivers, and 26 wilderness areas, making it a huge swath of land with minimal human encroachment. Additionally, there are many things that make the Sierra stand out from other mountain ranges in the contiguous United States. For example, there's General Sherman, a sequoia tree that holds the honor of being the largest tree in the world by volume. Mount Whitney in the southern Sierras is the tallest mountain in the lower 48, standing at just over 14,500 feet. And of course, there's Yosemite Valley, a popular tourist destination that sits right at the heart of the Sierras. And some say the Sierras might be home to Sasquatch.
Well, the Sierra Nevadas, of course, I mean, I'm not a geologist or anything, but I'll tell you, but they were formed when the tectonic plates were pushing together, and it caused an uplift in this zone, and created these mountains. And they are higher in Southern California. The peaks are higher than they are in Northern California. So you will have higher and steeper mountains down in the south central, let's say, like the Sequoia National Forest area, down around Mount Whitney.
The Sierra Nevadas are one of the older mountain ranges in the United States, and you can tell that because it has a lot of erosion. And down in the valley in the Fresno, Porterville, Sacramento, those are all the soils that have eroded away from the Sierra Nevadas. And so the soil is just outstanding. It can grow pretty much anything, oranges, all nectarines, almonds, all those things. We have diversity in trees, we have diversity in wild grasses, we have diversity in all kinds of food resources that are available because our soil is very rich. It's a wonderful place to be, and I think if I chose to be an animal, this would be the place I'd be, because I don't think I'd have to work too hard for food.
The Sierra Nevada mountain range in California is really a world unto itself. I've been all over the world, looking for Sasquatches. I've been in a lot of different environments, but the Sierras stand out as something really special, I don't know much about the geology, but it seems to me that it's mostly granite and it's really high elevation. There's thick forests in there. It's this combination of kind of like it's almost like high desert mountains, but it's not. At the same time, there's a lot more water than you'd find in a high desert. It's a really unique environment with a lot of topography and little biomes, little ecological niches all to itself. I've never seen anything else like it.
It's a very good habitat for something like a Bigfoot because there's all sorts of forest up there with no roads and no trails. There's a reliable supply of deer, which is the key thing for Bigfoots. They gotta have deer around. And it's been a place for Bigfoots for several thousands of years, and we know that because of the Tule River Indians and the Modocs with their petroglyphs, the hairy man.
The Sierra Nevadas are home to several Native American peoples, including the Miwok, Washoe, and Yokuts. These terms are not necessarily indicative of a tribe, but are groups of tribes that share related language. While each tribe and each culture lived in different regions of the Sierras, they all share one common figure, the Sasquatch.
So in California, most tribes have Bigfoot stories, whether it be good or bad. So if you go a little south down to the Porterville area, there are the well-known hairy man, pictographs, or painted cave. And Bigfoot, to them, the Tule River or Yokuts tribe, he's a creator. He helped create their tribe, and we get to walk on two legs because of him. Otherwise, Coyote would have had us walking on four legs, so he's very important to them. Versus then when you're here, this is the Miwok territory, it wasn't hostile, but it wasn't necessarily, hey bud, how you doing there? It was more of respectful, you're over here, I'm over here. We just won't, bother each other too much. But they have a lot of traditional stories actually based on the landscape here, which is those are my favorite stories, when you can point to something and go, this story about Bigfoot is associated with this. And so they do have this mountain behind us is Table Mountain. And Table Mountain has a Bigfoot story about obsidian. And the reason why Native people have obsidian is because Bigfoot went and got it, and then he became the mountain. And so Table Mountain is Bigfoot for them. And then we have another story where Bigfoot was known to be a cannibal. So he liked to eat humans as a food resource because he could. I imagine we're easier to catch than deer, so hate to think about it like that, but and the little ones are even slower and they're a little more, probably a little more tasty. But they have a story about Pinnacle Point Cave where the Bigfoot was going to get some people that were in it, and they basically didn't want to do this anymore, and so they took pine cones and they lit it on fire and they dropped it into the basket that was on Bigfoot's back. And so Bigfoot wore a basket so he could put the people in the basket so you can get more than one, right? And so because that caught on fire, he asked the people, he said, which way should I fall? And so they said, fall this way, and his bones are actually still here. And they're out towards Columbia. They're the white rocks that you see, and so they call those Bigfoot's bones. And so I find that very interesting that they have a lot of association with actual places associated with Bigfoot. And his traditional name is Jayali, and that's what they call him, and they freely talk about him.
Kathy Moskowitz-Strain is the forest archaeologist and forest heritage resource and tribal relations program manager for the Stanislaus National Forest, which is located in the central western part of the Sierras. She holds a BA in anthropology and a master's degree in behavioral science with an emphasis in anthropology. Throughout her career, she's used these skills all throughout the Sierra Nevadas.
So I've been an archaeologist on the Sequoia National Forest. That's where I started my career. And I started out as a student co-op, which I did as I was getting my master's. Then I became the district archaeologist. And then I became a zone archaeologist because we merged 2 districts together. And then I went to Nevada for the Spring Mountains National Recreation Area. That was the Humboldt-Tahoe National Forest. And I was the ecosystem archaeologist for that for 4 years. And then came back here to Sonora as the forest archaeologist. So I've been through all the ranks. I was still doing survey up until a few years ago when I was doing a survey and I fell. And instead of letting some firefighters help me up, I fought it and I ripped my meniscus in my knee. And so I've done some field work, but not like I was doing before. So, yeah, it wasn't, I knew I was hurt, because you start limping and I'm like, ooh, but it's a long story in the sense of workman's comp. Don't do it. It's not worth it. Just go to the right doctor the first time.
While Kathy may be well known in the National Forest Service, in the Bigfoot world, she is perhaps the most well known for popularizing the Tule River pictograph.
So down in Porterville, on the Tule River Indian Reservation, which is not open to the public, please do not go and try to see these because you will encounter tribal law enforcement. And what it is a pictograph which is painted on a rock. It's inside of a rock shelter, and it depicts all the animals that came to make man. And in particular, there's Dad Bigfoot, Mom Bigfoot, and Baby Bigfoot. And the male Bigfoot is literally 8 feet tall, painted on this rock, so literally 8 feet tall. And he has his arms out like this, and that's roughly 6 feet across, so it's very large pictograph, and it's red, black, white with some little bit of yellow. Mom is about 6 foot tall, her painting, and then Baby is about 4 feet. And he's got a lot of weird little hair coming out of him. He looks like a baby gorilla when they're all hairy and stuff. And the pictograph is about the story of how people were made, how Bigfoot created us on 2 feet versus 4 feet. And after they created man, man was afraid of Bigfoot, of hairy man. And so he ran away, and it hurt his feelings. And so he painted himself on the rock, but it shows him as crying because he was sad that man ran away from him. And all the animals painted themselves. And so Coyote painted himself on the ceiling because he wanted to be the most dominant pictograph, and he's eating the moon to show that he's powerful. And so they're incredibly beautiful. They've been drawn, at least in books, studied in books, at least from 1880s. And then there's a photograph of it from close to 1900. So it's not anything recent. We know it's quite old. It's there's bedrock mortars there. It's a small village. When the tribe picked or was asked their opinion of what reservation land they wanted those pictographs to be on the reservation because it was important to them. And they have a strong belief in Bigfoot. Bigfoot comes and takes their souls of those who have recently died and takes them to the other side. Just critical to their belief system. And it's not my opinion it's Bigfoot. It's the tribe's opinion it's Bigfoot. And I don't get to tell tribes what they believe or what something is or isn't. And so I have never seen another one personally. I have been told by Shoshone, some Paiute, even Miwok that there's other pictographs out there. So I wouldn't surprise me if there isn't.
In 2008, Kathy published a compilation of stories from 55 native cultures from across the United States, titled Giants, Cannibals, and Monsters, Bigfoot in Native Culture. This in-depth look at native cultures and their stories on the Sasquatch reveals patterns in behavior that otherwise would not be widely available, and stands as a seminal work for those seeking to do in-depth research into the Sasquatch subject.
how it came to be was I was asked to give a presentation at the University of Texas, San Antonio. And I try to customize the location with what, what that tribes from those areas have to say about Bigfoot versus bringing California to Texas. Texans don't care about California. But I was very doubtful. I was like, I'm not going to find anything, kind of thing. And opened my eyes when I did. It was quite a strong belief system in that area. And so that kind of was like, well, what else am I missing? What about Southeast? What about Ohio? What about all this other shit? What about Canada? What about Alaska? And so it just evolved from that I was just like, well, crap. And then I thought to myself, well, that makes perfect sense, because if a biological animal exists, then it should have touched everywhere. And so I just wanted to, put some of that stuff together, but not touch it, not give my opinion, not force you into a space. This is what the tribe says here. And it's just a collection of stories that most anthropologists do, some anthropologists will gather stories about coyote or about thunderbird or about different kinds of things. And so I just said, Bigfoot needs his time in the sunshine. Not everything's written down yet, but I'm going to write it down, because a lot of those elders passed during COVID. And now I'm making the assumption that their children know those same stories that, are related to this meadow or whatever, but it's on me. I know it. I need to write it down. And that's all. If you do have a Bigfoot custom you want to pass on, then great. I just want to write it down so that it lives past all of us, because, that's how oral tradition is how Native people pass down their stories in the first place. So I want to continue getting, remembering it, because if you don't remember it, then it's lost, and I don't want those things lost.
Kathy's book explores many other Sasquatch stories that take place in the Sierras, told by Miwok and Yokut peoples. Yet in spite of this presence in the folklore of the indigenous, the Sierra Nevadas has not been a primary focus for Sasquatch researchers, and there may be several reasons for that.
In the early days of Bigfooting, most of the stuff was coming out of British Columbia and Washington, largely because that's where the vast majority of researchers lived, essentially. John Green started writing about it, back in the probably early 50s or something like that, and he's from British Columbia. Rene Dahinden came over to British Columbia. So everybody was in British Columbia and Washington. As they collected reports, more stories came out, then Roger Patterson and the film and all that stuff, Northern California. But most of that stuff is in wet rainforest, essentially. And it was that tying to rain, I think, that had a lot to do with it. The wetter, the better. And that's true for Sasquatches even today. But, the Sierras collect a lot of precipitation. There is a lot of rain there. And of course, the snowpack adds on to that as well. There's very often a huge snowpack, in the Sierras. That creates a lot of plant life, essentially. Food, water, cover, like every other living animal. That's what these things want.
For the longest time, Peter Byrne was of the impression, or of the opinion, that the Sasquatch creature only lived in the Pacific Northwest, or in Nepal, which would be a different creature. So there wasn't a lot of focus. They didn't have the big expeditions, the Tom Slick expeditions. They didn't, and that was the heyday of looking for Sasquatch. They largely ignored Northern California. Roger Patterson was, in a lot of ways, trailblazer in looking for, Bigfoot in Northern California.
When you look back, it's like, well, there should have been more reports out of these Sierras, right? But at the time, who was going to the Sierras? I mean, nowadays we have, the North Face, we have Columbia, we have Marmot, and all these brands that kind of brand outdoor life and all this stuff along with their clothes. But back in the 1970s or 60s or even before, that wasn't really going on so much. It's a different world now. You know, people have more leisure time and it's easier to get these locations and the gear is better. I mean, I remember my backpack from 1976. It was horrible. It was a pain to wear. It hurt. It hurt, right? Not a ton of people were out doing this stuff. And the number of sighting reports from these time periods reflect that, essentially. There's more now than ever because more people are out now than ever. But back in the 30s, nobody was going out there. You know, that very few people were. There were probably some, but those were hardy pioneer stock sort of folks, you know, the very kind of people who are less likely to speak about such an encounter.
In the 1950s, there was an event that's pretty well known that happened up above Twain Harte, that a sheriff was called because there was a 12-foot monster screaming at people, and it scared everybody. And that quarry is actually still there. You can drive right by it. And so the police officers showed up for that, and they experienced something as well. They got screamed at, and so it was all over the papers. And so there for a little while, it was big news, and then it just kind of stopped and it faded away. And so we have reports from the 1940s as well from around Pinecrest, which is one of our most popular lakes. For a while in the 40s, it was just like all summer long. It was, you know, stuff happening, footprints being found.
The earliest people really doing Bigfoot research up there were journalists. It was Beann Slate and Al Berry. Al Berry wrote for the Sacramento Bee, and they went up and got the Sierra Sounds recordings. It was Al Berry hooking up with those local hunters who went up and got that. But it was Beann Slate and Al Berry wrote the book Bigfoot that really had the first kind of collection of modern stories. Talking about Bigfoots in the Sierras really goes back to basically the early, in a systematic way, goes back to the early 70s and not before.
Since the advent of the internet and websites like the BFRO website, used to be if you had an experience, you really didn't have it before the BFRO. You had no place. What do you do with it? Will you tell somebody and they go, oh, ha, ha, ha. It wasn't accepted, socially acceptable to have a Bigfoot experience in the Sierras. And so, but after the BFRO came along and their website and their database, people that were interested in it start seeing that, and they start seeing, and they're probably doing much the same as what I did in the beginning. I read all those reports and I went to some of the areas on my own just to say, you know, what is it about this area? Why would somebody see something there? You know, I think as the internet got bigger and time went on, that became more prevalent, and more reports started to materialize, you know, and get reported that Sierras, you know, finally made its way to the map, which it should have been all along.
The most popular piece of evidence to have come from the Sierras has to be the Sierra Sounds, captured by Ron Moorhead and Al Berry in the 1970s. Yet with the Sierras covering so much ground, there must be Sasquatch in other areas. Going north of the Stanislaus National Forest, we come to Lake Tahoe, located on the California-Nevada border. Through Kathy and later Bob's research, Lake Tahoe became the subject of multiple Bigfoot outings, with several pieces of audio recorded. But before we come to that, the question arose of just how Bob and Kathy met, and the answer was not what I expected. Their story begins in 2003 at the Willow Creek International Bigfoot Symposium.
So The 2003 International Bigfoot Symposium was the event of a lifetime. It was well planned by John Green. They had talked Bob into coming back to talk about the Patterson-Gimlin film, which he hadn't talked about in a long time. And so it was like, it was a big deal. And so everybody who was anything to do with Bigfoot was there. And so I was super nervous because I'm giving this talk, for the first time in front of these people I admired for a long time. But that's where I met Bob and where I met Tom Yamarone.
It's been a great weekend. A little warm, but I wrote this song over the course of the last year, and my wife said, "Why are you bringing your guitar? You're going to be camping." I said, well, I might be able to play it. Bigfoot, the living legend. And I'd be remiss if I didn't say happy birthday to my niece who's not here. She'll see it someday by magic. And say what a pleasure it is to be here with the panel that's about to speak. Everyone that's been here this weekend and all of you. So hope you enjoy it. A little bit of humor, a little bit of music. Well, I'm a mystery to everybody. Not many believe like this. Well, I'm alive and free, as real as can be, roaming through a forest of mist.
First, he started singing in the parking lot at nighttime, and so we would listen to his songs. And then he played the intermission between speakers up on stage, just, because we had time to spare, and so they let him get up there and sing.
Running through the forest, I don't wear no boot, 'cause I'm a living legend that they call Bigfoot. And taking my time, I don't wear no watch, 'cause I'm the type of creature that they call Sasquatch. You might see me running around the bend, but when you get there, you say, "Where are you, friend?" I'm nearby, but you don't get the hint, 'cause you're busy pouring plaster in my Bigfoot print.
Hi, I'm Tom Yamarone. Been doing the Bigfooting since 2003. I'm a Bigfoot songwriter and also a member of the Bigfoot Field Researchers Organization.
Still to this day?
Supposedly. I paid my dues 2 years ago, but yeah, I haven't been real active interviewing of witnesses and what you do in the group. So no, I had a stroke 7 years ago, so that's been really limiting me physically and whatnot. So we'll see if I go out again. I would need a van, I think, to go out in the woods and stay overnight, or a tent with a cot. But anyway, life has changed, but we move on and stay positive and go forward and still play the song. So looking forward to that. But no, so I got involved by going to the International Bigfoot Symposium in Willow Creek in 2003. I really wanted to meet John Green, the author of the great Sasquatch books and The Apes Among Us. So I went to the Willow Creek Symposium, and first thing as I pull into Willow Creek, there's John Green crossing the street. So I stop and honk and roll down my window and say, "Hey, John," and he says, "Hey." But at the same conference, Bob Gimlin came. And so that was a great plus. We got to meet and hear Bob Gimlin talk about the Patterson-Gimlin film.
Once I discovered the BFRO website, I read every sighting report, and the majority of them were investigated by her. They had her name at the very bottom of it. And so I had known who Kathy Moskowitz at the time was. And so she was familiar to me. I had no idea what she looked like or anything about her at all. I just knew the name. And it's not the reason that I went to the symposium. I went to the symposium with a group of friends of mine from the Bigfoot forums, and because it was just going to be an epic event, and she happened to be one of the speakers.
There was this new forum called the Bigfoot Forum. And I remember somebody saying something to me about it, and I was like, well, I don't know what that is. And they go, well, it's just a group of people who want to talk Bigfoot. And I'm like, oh, I got kids. I don't have time for this. But several of my BFRO buddies were members of that forum, in particular Alton Higgins. They decided as a group, Bob with some of these friends from this Bigfoot forum were going to go ahead and come, Tim Collins in particular was a very dear friend of mine, to come to this symposium because of what a big deal it was. And so they showed up there. You know, I'm saying hi to all these people that I've known from the BFRO, but because Bob was friends with Tim Cullen, they would hang around with each other. And I started going, who is this guy? You know, I don't know who this guy is. But he came off as being sincerely cool, you know, that he wasn't afraid of anything. It wasn't gonna, you know, bug him. And so
We made contact there, like I say, met, and then she joined the Bigfoot forums, and so I became better acquainted with her on the Bigfoot forums, and then I was invited to go to Lake Tahoe on an outing that she and her best friend Mantra had up at South Lake Tahoe. So I went up there with another fellow that I met at the conference, Tom Yamarone.
Bob wouldn't really talk to me at the symposium because I was with the guy who was kind of shunned at the Bigfoot forums, was an online interaction area back then. And not shunned, but Bob and his crew wouldn't acknowledge the guy I was with. The guy I was with, though, took me to the PG film site in his truck. On the day of Sunday of the symposium, Thursday through Sunday, they took people out if you paid an extra $50, you know, to go to the film site. And I didn't have that cash. It was already $145 for the ticket, you know, and so I didn't have that extra cash. But this guy drove me out, you know, to the film site, and we had a great time. And then on the way back, he took me by Louse Camp, and, you know, so it was a great tour of the Bluff Creek area. And then we went camping up there at a place called Aikens Creek on the Klamath River. And we had a little incident where he felt something had touched him through the tent. And I didn't feel it or hear anything. Again, I sleep very soundly, but when I told Bob that, he told me in the morning, I felt something press on me through the tent, and I woke up with my gun in my hand. You know, Bob said, I don't think you should camp with that guy anymore, you know, so so I met Bob first. Bob was kind of a mentor to me. He was a retired firefighter. I guess he had had a back issue and so retired from the Folsom Fire Department, but he had great stories as a paramedic. So no, Bob was like a mentor to me and really taught me how to camp out and go Bigfooting. You know, if it wasn't for Bob, I don't think I ever would have been confident enough to go into remote areas that I've gone into in Northern California and Washington.
Lying at just over 6,000 feet in elevation, Lake Tahoe is the largest alpine lake in North America and the second deepest lake in the United States. Tahoe is a major tourist destination, drawing people in for summer and winter recreation, making it a somewhat unexpected place for Sasquatch activity.
Lake Tahoe is a high elevation, very deep lake, very clear water, very cold water. It is remarkably beautiful. It's right on the border in fact, it is the border with Nevada. The state line runs through the lake. So on one side of the lake, you're in Nevada, on the other side, you're in California. One of the ingredients that would make it attractive for Bigfoots is on the east flank. You don't have to go very far to the east toward Nevada before you can drop down into lower elevation and get out of the snow if you wanted to. And of course, just like with the mountains here, it's on that backside, like on the side facing Reno, that there has, when we did an episode up there, several witnesses were witnesses who had incidents on that Nevada-facing slope, just to the east of Lake Tahoe. And I would expect there would be Bigfoots on the other side too, the western side, but it's so lush and so green and so wet. It's gonna be one of these places where it's gonna be a lot more likely to hear a Bigfoot than to see a Bigfoot.
The Lake Tahoe area is kind of overrun by tourists for the most part, but like everywhere else people go, they stick pretty close to town. They're in the casinos, they're on the highways, they might go on trails, that sort of stuff. But if you get just a little off the beaten path, like half mile out of town, you suddenly run into wilderness. And if it's not designated wilderness, it's functionally wilderness. not a lot of people are outside of these areas where people frequent, trails in the roads and whatnot. You're gonna run into people everywhere. But again, Tahoe is a big area and there's a lot of nothing up there as well. And that nothing is pretty easy to come by. I've done Bigfooting stuff around the Tahoe area, quite a bit actually. A lot of stuff on the west side. Like I think it's French Reservoir. I've led a couple expeditions with friends out to Stumpy Meadows Reservoir. I've camped on the fringes of the Desolation Wilderness area because when I lived in Southern California, that was a 6-7 hour drive. That's very reasonable, or it was at the time, for me to go Bigfooting. So I'd spent a lot of time in that zone. I heard and recorded vocalizations on Peavine Ridge. I remember that location. Closer to Tahoe, I've done some stuff outside of South Lake Tahoe. I've done some stuff in the area where Kathy, she didn't record it, but I think a witness gave her the Tahoe scream. I saw that location.
So I had gotten a report about a gentleman having sounds or screams coming from in Lake Tahoe. His house was right up against the forest. So he was the last house, forest, all the way. And I said, oh, okay. And I ended up going up there to see what he was experiencing, and I heard it too. And I was like, oh, we got something going on here. And so I encouraged him to keep a recorder out all night long. Just keep it running. Don't, get one of those high-end ones. And he was a professional musician, so he had one. And so he left it out one night, and he called me the next day, and he said, oh, I think I got a really good recording, and can I send it to you? And I said, yeah, send it to me. And it was good. So the original is a mom going like, woohoo, and the baby goes, ha ha, back, and there's like 3 of them all together.
It's like a high-pitched scream, like I said, like sonar. And then it goes on four times.
We had a sound guy, so we sent that recording to him to clean up, and the mom was too far away, but the baby was close enough to the recorder that's a very good recording, and we call it the Tahoe Scream, but that's where it came from.
One of the major pieces of evidence to have come from Lake Tahoe is a bit of audio dubbed the Tahoe Scream. Unfortunately, I was not given permission to include the Tahoe Scream in this documentary, but it is worth noting as it is what helped make Lake Tahoe a central location for Bigfooting in the early 2000s.
I was in a position where we were getting so many Bigfoot reports that I was starting to run out of energy covering, because I was one that I always liked going to the location to see what the witness was talking about, what he described, and see if I thought this was really plausible that this event happened. And so I was looking for additional people. Mantra, I'd already brought her in, but we usually did stuff together. And so Bob and Tom and several other folks, I was like, you guys live in California, you live in those counties like Nevada County that is getting stuff. Would you guys be interested in maybe, me funneling some of this stuff to you? And so anyway, so I decided, well, before I make an offer of that, let's take you Bigfooting. And so that's why we went to Lake Tahoe, to the hottest place. And I thought, if Bob lives closer or Tom lives closer, maybe they can come here more frequently than I can.
So I'm there in my little 92 Honda Civic, all packed with camping gear, and went up to South Lake Tahoe. And I had a Hi8 camcorder, and that's how I was going to record audio, because I didn't have an audio recorder. Back then it would have been like a Sony cassette recorder. We
went up there and spent 2 or 3 days in South Lake Tahoe. And there was another team there, a group of guys from Southern California that had like a little paramilitary group that they had gone on some outings. And they were also invited along as well. And so there was probably 8 or 9 of us.
Stuff up there happened almost every time we went up there. We would have something happen. And I warned them. I said, we're going to call blast, and there's going to be a response. And they go, oh, okay.
Up until that moment, there had been absolute silence in the forest. And she said, well, be aware that you'll probably get a response and probably pretty immediate. And so I said, okay, cool, you know.
Back then, the BFRO had refined it 3 great calls: the Ohio Howl, the Ohio Scream, and what they called the Tahoe Scream. And when they did the Tahoe Scream, it sounds like sonar off a submarine. And that got the response. That got these things screaming.
Immediately got a response back that was pretty close. I'd say less than 50 yards away. And it was loud, and it was reverberate. It was made it, you could feel it. You could feel it in your chest. As soon as that response came back, it was immediately. This paramilitary group, they all hit the ground, just flattened out on the dirt like, he's right on top of us, you know, incoming.
And it was instantaneous. And they all hit the ground because they're scared to death. And Bob's over there leaning up against his truck going, huh, yeah, that's kind of cool. And I was like, he didn't even flinch. Here's you got this Bigfoot screaming their brains on. Everybody else has hit the floor, you know, going, oh, it's gonna kill us. And here's Bob going, yeah, bring it. Do you wanna kill me? Just come on in. I went, I think that guy's not only hot, but he's a badass, and I should maybe get his number. And so that's how we met.
You see, I mean, I had heard these vocalizations similar to this at even closer proximity. And I understand being frightened by it, because I'll tell you that when I didn't know what was going on and I heard that, I was alone with one other guy camping in the woods in the wilderness area, it freaked me out too.
But then we pissed it off so much, it just screamed all night long. And so Tom Yamarone got that on a recorder for those screams. But it went on till like 4 or 5 o'clock in the morning.
So I had my high 8, you know, camcorder, and we were probably, you know, 200 or 300 yards away from camp at night using red lights on our headlamps, and so yeah, we heard the screams, you know, and the key with recording is don't talk, you know, don't make any sound. So I'm with some guy and I'm telling him, let's go back to camp. You know, I think you hear that on the recording I put on YouTube. It went on all night, but I sleep very soundly. And but Bob Strain would tell me the next day. He said it went on all night, all around our tent, you know, and so it was pretty intense screams. But it didn't sound like a howl to me, you know. So I wasn't freaked out. I thought it was really cool.
Lake Tahoe is around the lake and just a little bit off. And once you get away from that, it's quite forested and sparse. And I can imagine that one of the reasons why Bigfoot scream there so much is because they got to get up and over the sounds of people. It's different in other places where you don't hear as many screams or other kinds of noises like that, and I think it's because they don't have to. They don't have to compete with traffic noises or other things like that. So, you know, this place where we would go is, of course, outside of Lake Tahoe.
As chilling as Tom's audio is, there is another aspect of the Tahoe story I want to examine: the tree breaks.
Of course, it happened again the next night. But during the day in between, we checked the area and found a lot of fresh, broken trees and limbs. And she had been researching that area quite a bit and had marked them with electrical tape and documented their locations and GPS coordinates and all of that. So we found some new ones from the previous night.
There were also tree breakers there, and I would document each one of them, and I'd mark each one of them that I know about this. And I was trying to plot if there was a pattern to this happening. Was there, you know, it marks a trail or it marks something important, kind of thing.
It is an often discussed aspect of Sasquatch behavior, but one that is difficult to identify. Severe wind and snow can cause tree branches to break, and as trees age and decay, sometimes their limbs will fall on their own. Many people who are not familiar with the woods and are Bigfoot enthusiasts are quick to attribute these natural formations to Sasquatch. However, searching through the BFRO website and finding pictures of tree breaks from around Lake Tahoe, combined with Kathy's experience in the National Forest Service, I have reason to believe that these particular tree breaks are not simply wind damage. So if Sasquatch is in the woods twisting tree branches in on themselves, only one question remains. Why?
I think it was intimidation. I think that we went there so often and we were doing those calls and stuff, that maybe they just wanted us to get out of the area, leave us alone. I mean, I know whatever broke, I think it was the big male broke the tree and wrapped it around the other tree. I think he was feeling very territorial, because the Ohio howl, if is another Bigfoot, in the male dominant Bigfoot, I can see why they were like, there's another dominant male here that I can't tolerate being in the area, so. Eventually, wherever I've been, you always get maybe some consistency over a period of time, but eventually it always dies down. And I don't know if that's because they're also doing a seasonal round, or they stop reacting to you because they now figured you out and you're not that interesting, or I don't know.
Yeah, it's a prime area, but there's a lot of prime area in the Sierra Nevadas. Lake Tahoe is just where people are. Cliff will tell you, in order to have a Bigfoot report, you have to have a Bigfoot, but you have to have a person too, right? So there's Bigfoot up there in the mountains, but if there's nobody there, you're not going to get a report. And at the time, I had no clue, absolutely no clue, how incredibly stealthy and ninja-like these animals are. They're incredibly athletic. They dwarf humans in size and ability in every respect. So it's not a surprise that that they aren't seen more often. As a matter of fact, generally speaking, if they're seen, they've made a mistake. They didn't see you. They didn't know you were there. That's how you saw them, generally speaking.
After the incredible outing to South Lake Tahoe in 2003, much of Bob, Kathy's, and Tom's research began to be focused in other areas. And as the years moved forward, their relationships with each other continued to grow.
It was a very productive, active area. It was quite an introduction to the world of Bigfooting for me, and then I was hooked. And so from there, we just became, acquainted and friends, and did more investigations together. And she was able to get me into the BFRO and became an investigator in the BFRO. And they have different levels of investigators. They had curators, and they had who oversaw investigators. So she was a curator in California, and I was an investigator. So I, would use her as a source and a mentor for the investigations that I was doing through the BFRO. And we started, seeing more and more of each other. And next thing you know, we're dating and we're married. Best thing that ever happened to me.
Okay, Kathy and Bob, I went to their wedding on July 4th, 2005. Congratulations on your upcoming 20th anniversary, guys. Anyway.
I met Kathy Strain back in maybe 2004 or 5, maybe 5, maybe something like that. I had made friends with Tom Yamarone, and Tom was already friends with Bob and Kathy at the time. They weren't even married yet, in fact, and Tom Yamarone was going out with them. And I got invited to a workshop that Kathy hosted up in the Sierra Nevada mountains called Operation Odyssey.
Operation Odyssey was an absolute cool endeavor that I'm science-based. I want people to use science to prove Bigfoot is real. And I get sick and tired. I've become, I guess I'm bitter, I don't know what it is. But so Bob, Mantra, and I decided that we were going to help the public, help our friends, help people try to do this better. Use a journal, use all this stuff. And so we picked some people off of the Bigfoot forums to come to this Operation Odyssey. And it was just, gonna come up and camp, bring your own food or whatever. We're just gonna have this class. And so one of them was Cliff Barrickman.
And this is my first, really is one of my first social forays into Bigfooting. You see, I'd gotten into Bigfoot stuff and started going out into the woods doing field stuff back in 1994, thereabouts. So the first 7, 8, 9 years or more, 10 years maybe, I don't know, I was doing it alone, essentially. I was doing the best I can to learn and read books and whatever else, run across occasional witnesses, that kind of thing. But when I met Kathy, she introduced me to a few people. I joined the BFROs shortly after that, so I had access to a ton of witnesses. That's when I kind of view that the page turned in my own Bigfooting career. Well, you can only get so far by yourself. At some point, you need someone else to kind of point the way to you, and Kathy served that purpose for me. Kathy showed me how to do good documentation. She showed me some things I could look for in the woods. She opened some doors for me into larger realms. And Bob, of course, I love Bob. Bob showed me that you can do all this stuff and still have a really good time with good friends.
Operation Odyssey was pretty cool. We've done a couple of them, and originally it was came out of the frustration that if you want to be a Bigfoot researcher, then at least do it right. It's like anything else. Whatever your passion is, do it right. Do it good, have pride in it, or just don't bother. And so we thought, it would be fun. Let's just there's no standards out there. There's no textbooks on how to Bigfoot, how to research a Bigfoot, how to document a Bigfoot. Let's set a standard. Let's set a bar. Let's set a bar. And of course, Kathy being the scientist, I wasn't. I was the outdoors guy. So I said, let's incorporate all of that together. It's like, okay, you want to be a Bigfoot researcher. This is what you will want to do it right. And we started out from everything, from square one, what kind of gear to have, choose a place to go, let people know where you're going, how to get into where you're going safely, how to get out safely, what happens if you have an emergency in there? And all of this is just backwoods skills type stuff. But also, let's say you have an encounter or you find a piece of evidence, what do you do with it? How do you document it? And how do you preserve it? How do you recognize it? And then what will be the disposition of it? What do you do with it after that?
During the day, we would do classes, like how to pour a plaster cast, how to do this, how to do that. And at night, then we would call blast and send people out in teams and see what we could hear. And first one was up in Oroville area, and Cliff was part of that. And so and he considers me a mentor because, just hammering those basics, science, write it down, record it. Have a journal with you, have a photograph, a camera, have a recorder, have a ruler. It's all those things that just get in that habit, even if it's nothing, because you can always If you collect data that ends up not being important, you can throw it away. But if it's important data but you didn't collect it, you don't get to go back.
They invited me to go and it made me a sponsor of this thing called Operation Odyssey in 2004. So it was September 2003, the symposium, October 2003, our Tahoe campout with the recordings, and it was April 2004, Operation Odyssey. And there my wife Marilee came with me and we camped and it snowed on us. And we were above Orville, Lake Orville. And so Operation Odyssey was also where I met Cliff Berkman, if I want to name drop, but that was pretty epic.
What was Cliff like back then?
Cliff was a very quiet, solitude guy. Unlike now, he's, no, anyway, Cliff was a great guy. He always has been. And so with Cliff, who lived in Long Beach down here, I would visit from the Bay Area where we rented a home to my childhood home in La Crescenta at Thanksgiving and Christmas. And on the Friday after Thanksgiving, we all got together at Cliff's to make cast copies. You know, he had these molds and latex molds of epic casts like Laird Meadow and Roger Patterson's Laird Meadow casts. And so we'd go to Cliff's house and mix plaster with a drill and then pour it into the molds and make copies, you know. So I loved the casts, and that's what really got me started. The Willow Creek Museum had a display of the Jerry Crew casts. And I thought, man, what made that footprint that big, you know, in the mud? And that really got me started doing this, so.
We did it then, like 2 years later, we did it again up here. And that one was the best one because there was an abandoned camper. Made it look like Bigfoot had broken into the camper and had left like blood and different kinds of stuff. It was I had more fun with that than I've ever done. And what I did is, because I know what I did to set the crime scene, I can tell when I send people through the scene, what did you miss? You know, oh, did you notice these hairs? These obvious Bigfoot hairs hanging right here that you could have collected and we could get DNA off of? Did you didn't pick up on these footprints over here? Oh, you missed this. And so I think it was just a good way of teaching people that take your time to look at everything. You know, don't just say, oh, there's a barbed wire fence there. How interesting. No, barbed wire catches hair. We know that it does. Look. You know, let's put some science in there. At least look. If there's nothing there, what did you lose? You're outside having a good time. So that's my attitude. Have fun with it. Be outside and Bigfoot while you're there, but you're still outside.
Yeah, it was free, of course. It's free, you know. And so everybody that attended had a great, absolute, fantastic time. And still friends today. You know, people that were, you know, on those things. So, yeah, we need to do another one.
How do you think your life would be different if you never decided to go up to that symposium?
Well, you know, I'd already started writing Bigfoot songs, so, but I never would have met Bobo or Kathy or Bob Gimlin. So very different. Yeah. I've had a very different life.
Throughout the making of this documentary, I realized I had tapped into a special time in the history of Sasquatch researchers. From the Willow Creek Symposium to Project Odyssey, these events brought so many people together for the first time, many of whom we consider some of the top people in the Bigfoot world. And yet back then, they were just friends looking for Sasquatch in their spare time. There's so much left to tell of this special age, pre-finding Bigfoot, with stories of Tom, Cliff, and Bobo hanging out with John Green and Bob Gimlin, but I'll have to save that for another time, when we dive deeper into the mountains of mystery.
Right when I say screams.
Do it.
Ready? Here we go. Well, I'm a mystery to everybody, not many believe we exist. Well, I'm alive and free, as real as can be, roaming through the forest mist. Yeah, for many a year in the canyon you'll hear my songs that many call screams. Feel as far as I can, getting away from many, living off the forest and drinking from the street. I'm running through the forest, I don't wear no boot, 'cause I'm the living legend that they call Bigfoot. I'm taking my time, I don't need no watch, 'cause I'm the timeless creature that they call Sasquatch. You might see me running around the bend, but when you get there you say, where are you, friend? Well, I'm nearby, but you don't get the hint, 'cause you're busy pouring plaster in my Bigfoot print. Hey, running through the forest, I don't wear no boot, 'cause I'm the living legend that they call Bigfoot. Taking my time, I don't need no watch, 'cause I'm the timeless creature that they call Sasquatch. Deep in the dark of the forest night, I'm just at the edge of your campfire's light. I'm camouflaged, all covered in hair. If it wasn't for my smell, you wouldn't know I was there. Curiosity draws me to your campfire flame. I circle your camp, it's all just a game. I tap my Bigfoot to the songs that I hear. Maybe it's the beat, maybe it's the beer. I'm running through the forest, I don't wear no boot, 'cause I'm the living legend that they call Bigfoot. I'm taking my time, I don't need no watch, 'cause I'm the timeless creature that they call Sasquatch. Man, I'm believing like me could be living near you, feel happy and free. I don't mind when I see what you do, all the killing and the fighting, you're the savage, it's true. I'm running through the forest, I don't wear no boot, I'm the living legend that they call Bigfoot. Taking my time, I don't need no watch, 'cause I'm the timeless creature that they call Sasquatch.
That was awesome.
Thanks. Good call, too.